It's a really good question, and it's something we should probably talk amongst ourselves about a bit more as well. I think, look, the first thing is that it really does come down to just ambition, right? We don't really wake up every day and kind of go, do you know what? It'd be nice to do a good ad today. Like, there's a reason the company's called Special. You know, we quite often talk about this idea of the most expensive mistake you can make in this industry is to do average.
Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Well, today I am joined all the way from New Zealand by Rory Gallery. Now, Rory is a distinguished marketing strategy who is currently serving as Chief Strategy Officer and Partner at the Special Group New Zealand. Now, I'm sure you know Special Group. They do some phenomenal work and they are everywhere. They are in the US, they're in the UK, they're in New Zealand. An amazing independent creative agency, and Rory's tenure at Special Group has been marked by amazing achievements, including the agency being named most effective agency at both New Zealand and APAC Effies and Global Creative Agency of the Year by Campaign. Now, Rory joined Special Group in 2018. Before that, he held the position of Head of Strategy at McGarry Bone in London, where he worked on brands like Sony, Green and Black's Chocolate, and Boddington's Bitter. Prior to that, he was Board Strategy Director at AMV BBDO London, and he contributed there to the global Made of More strategy for Guinness, which garnered multiple Cannes Line and Gold IPA Effectiveness Awards. His expertise is globally recognised. In 2022, he was named Global Strategic Planner of the Year at the Campaign Global Awards in London. So he has had an amazing career to date. He does amazing work with the team at Special Group, and Special Group just is an amazing story. I'm a huge fan of what they do, and I had the creative directors from the LA office join me last year for my Super Bowl special. That was the ad they did with Uber with the Beckham, so incredible work. So really delighted to have Rory joining me from New Zealand here today. He's got such an amazing perspective to share, and we're going to get into all of that in a phenomenal episode today. There's so much to get through, but before we do, if you are enjoying episodes, That's What I Call Marketing, and I hope you are, it would be amazing if you can rate or review the show. It really does help us in terms of reaching new listeners and a new community of engaged marketers just like you. And we are always looking for people to support That's What I Call Marketing. So if you would like to get involved, sponsor That's What I Call Marketing, you can find us on LinkedIn and drop us a note there, and I'll be happy to share our sponsorship kit for you for 2025, which also includes our sponsorship opportunity for Cannes. So if you would like to get involved with us with any of the opportunities or with our Cannes opportunity, do let me know. So on to today's episode with Rory Gallery from Special Group New Zealand. Rory, thanks a million for joining me. That's What I Call Marketing. Great to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks so much for having me on.
You're looking sprightly. It's your morning. I look like shit. I'm ready for bed.
It is my morning, and it's Tuesday here, so I'm already ahead of you.
Yeah, well, really don't know, Rory's in New Zealand.
Yeah, so it's west coast of Ireland as today, though. So there's a weather warning, and there's a storm about an hour north of Auckland. So hopefully it doesn't hit during the podcast.
Well, listen, I mean, yeah, west of Ireland, New Zealand, there's been a bit of a journey that's kind of taken you from there to where you are today.
Yeah.
And without going through it all, you've had some really interesting moments in your career, and you worked on some Guinness work, some pretty famous Guinness work in your time. I'd love to hear about that, because I've just interviewed Growing Your Way First. You kicked off season 4 talking about some of the amazing Diageo work that's going on now, but you were involved in some of the earlier work.
Yeah. Oh, look, I was super lucky. I guess I'd spent about 5 years in kind of the industry at this point, and I was living in Sydney for a couple of years, and I kind of decided that from a sort of career perspective that London was something that I wanted to do. Yeah. So headed over, and Abbott Mead Vickers, they were like, oh yeah, we think we have a role at your level. It's a job on Guinness. And in all honesty, I had to try and keep a straight face, because it didn't really matter how much they were going to pay me after that. Or what the role was. I was always going to take it, but I had to sort of be cool.
Like, cool.
And I guess it was a really interesting time at that point, because Guinness was, compared to where it is now, it was definitely at a bit of a crossroads. Abbott Mead Vickers had sort of a long, heritage of doing
Yeah.
absolutely incredible work for Guinness. But I think they were kind of going through a little bit of a dry patch, and I guess the brand was not doing particularly well. And where credit's due to Diageo, they made some pretty significant strategic decisions back in 2013 around the marketing principles that sit behind how brands grow. They really embraced them. So, there was a white paper that they developed that was around, I guess, just imbuing all of the learnings from the long and short of it from, Byron Sharp. And I actually remember reading it in my first couple of weeks at AMV. And I guess I feel quite lucky because that's kind of basically thinking that I've taken and just applied where,
Yeah.
and it tends to work quite well, unsurprisingly. So, they really kind of like overinvested in the brand. They kind of looked at their share of voice, etc. And so there was a few things that started to happen around that, but you still need to get the work right. You can't forget the importance of the magic of creative work. And Made of More had kind of launched as a brand platform, but there was lack of
Right.
definition around exactly what that platform meant. But equally speaking, there had been two executions. I'm not sure if you remember them. One was Cloud and
Yeah.
the other one was Clock. And really beautiful bits of creative work, I might add. They were creatively awarded, but when they were kind of researched, they weren't, I guess, performing as strongly as one would have hoped. And again, credit to Diageo at this point, because you could have said, you know what, we've made two ads, we spent a lot of money, and this isn't connecting. But we were kind of asked to diagnose what we kind of thought the issue was. And the work that we had made prior was sort of inanimate objects, and it kind of lacked a bit of personality. And someone
Yeah.
once said to me, I don't expect a Guinness ad to be set in Ireland, but it should have the energy of being in a pub in Ireland on a Saturday night. And I
Right.
felt like that was just a really insightful way of kind of sort of thinking about the sort of energy, the community, and lots of the great Guinness ads of the past have had that. Swim
Yeah.
Black being probably my favorite ad
Yeah.
set in Italy, but it had all of those components. So that kind of was the brief that would go on to lead to the Sapeurs, which I'm not sure if you remember, but it was these sort of guys in the Democratic Republic of Congo that kind of dressed up really unique in a really unique way, and kind of all came and gathered in a pub on a sort of Saturday night and competed for who was the best dressed. Which, I still look back on it and go, it still doesn't look out of place today. It's sort of beautifully
Oh,
made and a banger at the time.
oh, yeah. I remember that coming out because when it came out, it was so different, But it's really interesting what you said there. The energy of an Irish pub on a Saturday night like that. I didn't know that piece,
Yeah.
and so that's really interesting. Watch that ad, you can absolutely see that energy. But how'd you get to Sapeurs as something for Guinness?
Well, look, Nick and Nadia, who were the sort of creative originators, they're both from South Africa. I guess they were aware of this story, and they kind of felt like it was quite suited to the, I guess, as an answer to the brief. It was actually the first thing that I saw in a creative review, but we actually probably worked on it for about a few more months after that. And I would say that we probably ended up having in the region of, 4 or 5 rounds of creative work before eventually everyone went back to that. And we did actually, it was quite interesting. It went into research, and there was 4 or 5 concepts up against it. And again, this kind of just shows like it's quite amazing, that sort of like research environment, and just how careful you need to be and how artificial it sometimes is. So I was in Dublin at the focus groups first, kind of sitting behind that window. And the first couple of focus groups were a bit of a disaster for it, actually. A lot of people thought it had sort of like whiskey ad vibes, and they didn't kind of get the energy at all. Cause you're kind of dealing with like, playing someone or reading someone a script with a bit of a storyboard. And what we did was, there was a TV show at the time called Treme, which was from the makers of The Wire. And it was about
Okay.
music in New Orleans. And there's a sort of scene at the start that has kind of got, again, that kind of energy of like Saturday night in a Dublin pub or a country pub in Ireland vibe. And we played that before we played the script in the rest of the groups, and it kind of sailed through. So it's just quite interesting. There was so many different points where where that work, as in the case of most great work, where it nearly didn't happen.
One of the things that strikes me is what Tom Kinsler said to me when I recorded the episode about the Christmas ad that he made. He said the role of the client in protecting the idea and the flame of the idea, and and so like it's really interesting, as you say, that could have been killed so many times, both probably in the agency where people are like, all right, whatever, but also on the client side where they had to then bring it through and probably convince a lot of people that it was the right work. It's just such a dynamic, isn't it, to get right, because it can, at any moment, it can go wrong.
It's so interesting you bring that up. I talk about it all the time to our team, because if you kind of break down the process of how ideas get realized in the world, there's the coming up with them, and every agency in the world comes up with great ideas every single day. So that's the first part. The third part is making them, which, if you've kind of got capable people, you should be able to execute really well. But there's the bit in the middle that is sort of this like unspoken about, fog that you have to go through, where you have to kind of defend ideas and the integrity of them and ensure that they don't break along the way. And agencies don't get really paid for that. And it's not necessarily part of a client's job description, but I kind of argue that, the vast majority of great ideas that are out there in the world, it's the people who really understand how to navigate being in the fog tend to be the most successful, because people are just dying to kill ideas or find reasons as to why they're not right, or water them down. That's special. We've kind of got a bit of a philosophy of sorts that we use to kind of help navigate it, and we call it the glass and the clay. So the glass is kind of, I guess, the bit of the idea that if you change it, it's going to break it, whereas the clay, right, where, okay, we're open to sort of shaping that. But if you break the glass, then the idea dies in our mind. So you've got to be really persistent and tenacious in that middle bit. And it's definitely one of the toughest part of our jobs, but I actually find it the most rewarding as well.
I like that, the glass and the clay. That's really good, because it's kind of about knowing which battles to have. But then it's also knowing, I think, which questions to ask people, because you're right. People want to have an opinion. You don't want all of their opinions, but people want to give you one. And particularly when it comes to advertising, and people like, oh, well, we don't do that. Or like, I remember we had stuff in Indeed where I was like, no, we're not, it's not humorous. And why? We're not a humorous brand. Why? Like, you should be like a 4-year-old. Why? That sounds ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? They've eventually got there to, a bit of enjoyment in their advertising, but for years it was a strongly held belief.
Yeah.
The person needed everything, and then everything gets boring, and you know what I mean? It's like, no, there's enough. Everything's serious. We don't need advertising to be serious.
Very, very true.
You stayed in London for a bit. You moved to McGarry Bone, is that right?
Yeah.
And head of strategy role. So you kind of went in, I'll take any Guinness job you want. I don't care what you pay me. And then head of strategy. Like, those moments obviously come in your career. And look, obviously great work behind you, and a great track record. Those moments are big shifts, right? Going to that head of strategy role. How did you, I guess, navigate that? Did you find you had to change your ways or anything?
Yeah.
When you make
It's quite interesting, like, because look, I mean, I was 30 at the time, so it's quite young to be sort of doing that job. It's quite interesting that you asked that question, because if I was to give myself one piece of advice, kind of going back to the person that started the job, it would be don't change. But I think so much of what makes people good at their jobs is actually when they just really lean into what makes them themselves. And over the years, the temptation is that you kind of try and sound a bit more like the Oxbridge educated people, or, you try and sort of become more academic sounding than you actually are naturally, all those kind of things. Whereas I think the reality is that the thing that has served me best is that when I've actually just kind of really leaned into, I guess, who I am, where I come from, how that helps kind of define how I think about things, which usually ends up meaning that, a lot of what I pride myself on is just being simple and straightforward. And fortunately for me, that's actually quite a valued thing when it comes to strategy. So I don't necessarily think it's anything particularly special about me. I think it's just actually what the the industry kind of desires and needs. So yeah, I definitely think to answer your question, I probably at the time sort of tried to change a bit. And I think in reality, when I kind of course corrected myself and just started embracing who I am and where I come from and how I do things, that kind of has led to being able to navigate what is actually quite a tough time in your life, because, it is a step up, but also,
Yeah. Yeah.
young kids and all that stuff to contend with as well, which is an interesting time in your life.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, isn't it? Those things happen at that moment. You know what I mean? Like a job where it probably requires more of your time comes at a moment in your life where, if you're going to have kids, it's going to be naturally around that age. So you've all these, all these pressures. You probably moved house at the same time as well, or something. I don't know.
Well, yeah, probably. And
You have moved around quite a bit, and you made the move to New Zealand, which probably, yeah, you've been in Australia, came back, you were in London, New Zealand. Tell me about that, because, and maybe the timing of it as well, because I know like Cade I'm right in saying Cade was in London and he went back to set up, Cade Hyde being one of the founding partners of Special Group, went back to set up Special Group. How far after that did you join Special Group?
so it's quite interesting. So Special actually started in New Zealand around about 2008. So
That far?
yeah, so it's younger than Facebook, but I guess older than some kind of think it is. So I was in New Zealand, and, quite interesting. Like over the years, I was sort of loosely aware of Special because I was in Australia when they weren't there, and they did some really amazing work over the years. They won a Grand Prix for a bit of work for a brand called Orkan, which is a broadband company, where they got Iggy Pop to play with a whole bunch of people effectively on Zoom before that, before kind of demonstrate, I guess, the power of broadband Orkan. So they kind of put themselves on the map with that. They also did a really humorous piece of film to launch an award show here that kind of went viral, which was all about how New Zealand is the most awarded country in the world per capita, but it was all about how New Zealand has got the conditions in order to ensure creativity thrives. And it was stuff like, we've got beaches, but the weather will just shit itself. So you end up having to go back and come up with ideas. Our celebrities aren't famous enough, so we've got to rely on real thinking. So it was really, really good. So I kind of, I guess, was an admirer from afar. And
Yeah.
I guess at the time in question of deciding to move to New Zealand, so my wife's a Kiwi, my kid, I had a young sort of baby, and we kind of thought, you know what, it sort of feels like it's appropriate to move to New Zealand. So I kind of reached out to a recruiter and was like, look, I'm thinking of moving to New Zealand. It might take a while to get a job at the level I'm at, but it all happened pretty quickly, to be honest. And so within the space of about 3 weeks of deciding to move there, I kind of had signed a contract.
Amazing. And one of the things actually, because really interesting, the things you kind of said there, even about that like piece they did, it was like very Irish in some of the ways. Like New Zealand, it reminds me a little bit of Ireland in terms of whether we don't have the wine, but we've other things. But even kind of maybe the size of New Zealand, and yet here we have out of New Zealand, or kind of spawning out of New Zealand, maybe one of the most awarded in the last number of years, agencies. It's got offices kind of all over the place now. What do you think are the factors that's made Special so special and so successful? Because I think others look at it, if you take maybe the Irish landscape and go, where's the special? Like, can there be a Special for Ireland?
It's a really good question, and it's something we should probably talk amongst ourselves about a bit more as well. I think, look, the first thing is that it really does come down to just ambition. Like, we don't really wake up every day and kind of go, do you know what? It'd be nice to do a good ad today. Like, there's a reason the company's called Special. We quite often talk about this idea of the most expensive mistake you can make in this industry is to do average, of which there is a study out that kind of does actually show that now to be true. But we definitely wake up every day and it's our ambition to do the best work in the world. And when I say that, I don't just mean creatively, I mean from an effectiveness perspective as well. I do think that there is a mentality in New Zealand, which is, it's kind of on the edge of the world. It's a little bit of an underdog mentality, but there's no reason why it can't do amazing, epic things. And there's a long history, not just necessarily about the All Blacks, but of, individuals or companies or sports teams or whatever it is,
Yeah.
where they have kind of set a precedent and, decided that they want to be the best in the world or do a world first. I mean, and that stems right back to New Zealand was the first country in the world to give women the right to vote. So it's sort of baked into the culture, I think, here. And I feel like the advertising industry reflects the culture and mentality of New Zealanders. There's a mentality here called number 8 wire, which is basically this wire that you can buy in a hardware store, and you can kind of, for whatever you need to bind together, you can
Right.
you can use this wire.
Yeah.
But I guess the sort of meaning of it really is that no matter what our resources are, or no matter what face, if you kind of use that mentality of, what we can bring it all together and do something great, is sort of
Mm.
pretty prevalent in the country. And I don't necessarily think people talk about it day in, day out, but it is an attitude that people have. So I think globally that sort of mentality has been embraced as the offices have opened up around different parts of the world.
Yeah.
You've seen the work that I'm sure that we've done for kind of Uber and Uber Eats, which has been really epic work. I think a lot of that is driven by, we always talk about this imaginary sign that we've got over the door, which says special. And we just feel like any work that does go out through that door does kind of need to have that stamp of approval. And I guess when you have got a really high ambition, it doesn't necessarily mean that you achieve it every time, but it does mean that you
Yeah.
get closer and closer.
It is fascinating. I can remember specifically, was the first Uber campaign that I remember Special doing with the first global one. It was around tennis. And I can't remember, was
Yeah,
it, maybe it was
Australian
the
Open
US?
ambush.
It was the Australian Open, was it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I remember at that time going, and I can't remember when that was, but going, like, that's amazing. That, like, the work was great. It was really clever. Like, no, I don't remember anything like that had been done before that, right? It just felt really clever. But I was more kind of going, like fair play for actually getting that in and bringing in such a big global account, right? Because that's where my head was going, like the account man and me going, like, wow, that's a lot of work to get that
Yeah.
in,
Like
and the trust.
the guys, Cade and Lindsay and Thomas Jones, they've done an incredible job. And Dave and Celia as well. It's kind of started kind of like in Australia, and it's just kind of expanded. And, they've done some brilliant work around the world. I guess, I didn't have any involvement in Australian Open ambush, other than admiring it. It is an absolutely brilliant idea. But I guess what I really love about that story, and very similar to the Made of More story from earlier, is that Uber Eats started with this platform, Tonight I'll Be Eating, and it went on to sort of have legendary success, winning Grand Prix at the Australian Effies a number of years later, and produced some brilliant work, including the Australian Open ambush, but very similar to Made of More. Like, that campaign actually existed for a decent amount of time before you would have seen that work. And I quite often feel with long-term brand platforms, when you set out to kind of create them, you don't always do your best work in the first one or two. It kind of tends to get better over time. And even I would sort of put, IKEA's The Wonderful Everyday sort of in a similar boat. And I reckon it'd be really interesting to look at the sort of, top 10 brand platforms that exist in the world today, and kind of go, how many of those started great and how many actually just got better and better over time? Because I can't help but feel like, and I've spoken about this quite a bit before, a little bit like the first iPhone, the 10th iteration is going to be better than the first one. And it feels like that's something that really stood to Uber. That platform got better and better over time.
You are listening to That's What I Call Marketing.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.
The thing with that then is that, again, when we go back to the client side piece, is the bravery, or I hate that word actually, but the confidence of the client, all of them, whoever they were, kind of going, yes, we're willing, we know this is right, and we know we're going to stick with it. Because, if it's not brilliant, maybe after the first two or three, the risk is you kind of go, oh, look, we're done. So that, like, again, you mentioned with Guinness, kind of that, like, willingness to diagnose and go deeper and figure out what was or wasn't working to get it to where it needed to be, requires skill, requires great partners in your agency as well.
Oh, it totally does. I mean, It's really difficult as well, because obviously the kind of tenure of how long people end up in a job for kind of challenges that. But the reality is that creating a long-term platform, it takes time to come up with it. Then it takes time to kind of bed in, and then it takes time to make it really good. And those can kind of take quite long periods of time and long windows. It's quite rare that you hit a home run with the first execution of a new platform. And I think that's what everyone's striving to do is hit a home run, whereas the reality, I think, is actually quite different.
Speaking maybe home runs and platforms, and I don't know where it's at in terms of the longevity of the one that you shared with me towards the end of last year, the beer and ice. Can you explain that to people, and maybe explain where that is in terms of the life of the platform?
So DB Export is, I guess, big beer here. Export Ultras are kind of, I guess, a slightly lower calorie offering, and they've had a platform in play. The whole thing is the beer for here. So this was actually kind of our first big campaign that we did for that platform. And I guess the beer for here is kind of about an inherent understanding of being for New Zealand. So I guess kind of just to talk about the origination of the specific campaign that we did for them. You know, some of the best campaigns in the world solve some of the biggest problems. And we were kind of talking about some of the biggest problems that New Zealanders face in summertime. And this might not mean a lot to you, but there are a few that are really, like, Kiwis talk about all the time. So traffic, because it's summer season here. Holiday traffic, God, they love to talk about it. Before they've even went on holiday, they're talking about, what time they need to leave to get back. Another one is holiday.
They are right. Vince,
Another one is holiday rubbish. So you go away to what they call batches, which are holiday homes here, but then you've got nowhere to put your rubbish. So what are you going to do with it? Always a bit of a challenge. But then I guess, and the one that we ended up tapping into was this idea of accidentally freezing your beer in the freezer over summertime. So I'm sure most people at some stage have put a drink in the freezer and frozen it. It's a particularly pertinent problem in New Zealand. A lot of beer that you buy in the supermarket can be kind of, I guess, not chilled. But then the other thing, which is somewhat challenging, is people will purchase beer, they'll put it in their car, it's hot weather, they'll get to wherever they're going to, and then they don't have any cold beer to have a beer when they get there. So basically, our kind of insight was around this idea of not just necessarily about there's lots of warm beer in the freezer that in New Zealand that needs to be put in the freezer. It's actually about the feeling that you get when you accidentally freeze that beer. And we did some research, and the commentary around it is like absolutely hilarious. People kind of talk about how it caused fights in the flat, because it's the mess that comes with it as well.
Oh yeah. It's horrendous.
For me personally, the one that I really resonated with is just the amount of people who just look in the freezer and go, "Oh, fuck's sake. I can't believe I just did that." So basically the kind of solution to that is we created something called the Cold Callback Service, where you can text vanilla ice and perfect spokesperson, and 34 minutes later, he'll call you back, because that's the perfect amount of time to chill your beer in the freezer. And each time you call him, there's a sort of slightly different message. So, for example, there was ones that were specific to Christmas, where he's rapping, "Wish you Merry Christmas," but the end of it is, "Now go save that beer." There's more to come kind of across Valentine's Day. We've kind of got, specific ones to kind of holiday weekends, etc. He ended up being also incredibly talented and has made a kind of brilliant promo video around it. So yeah, it's a fun bit of work. What I really like about it is that beer advertising around the world from the last kind of 10 to 15 years has just got really, really, really serious. It's nearly like it's forgotten about the fact that it's a beer.
Yeah.
Lost its sense of who it is. That whole category is really struggling in general, not just because of trends, but also there's just far too much advertising, which is way too wordy, and in the way they try and connect with people. So it's quite refreshing to, I guess, work in a campaign which sort of seeks to inject humor back into the category. And I think people so far have loved it for that reason.
Yeah, it is funny, isn't it? How beer, which is something that's, we enjoy it, we enjoy with people, and it's associated with fun. it stopped being fun because I don't know, and I don't know why. I'm gonna guess it's to do with, responsible drinking and that side of things. But even the 0-0 work, which could inject tons of
Yeah.
fun, you know what I mean? It's not there.
Look, I could be completely wrong about this, and I'm going to give my theory about it, but I'm not saying I'm right. I actually think, ironically, the move towards consistent brand platforms has actually been not necessarily a great thing for the work that is coming out of the category. And my rationale around that is, and I'm saying this as someone who is part of the Guinness brand platform, I think a lot of the platforms that are created in beer are kind of based on these very aspirational lifestyle attitudes that they're trying to create around beer. And that kind of tends to lead towards work that is a bit more serious and worthy. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't seek to create a long-term brand platform, but I just think it's a little bit as to why we're seeing work that is maybe taking itself a bit too seriously. So anyway, look, I guess what is great about that though is that it gives brands like DB Export the opportunity to kind of inject that kind of humor back into the category. And I think whilst it's really insightful campaign that really delivers on a very serious problem, I think kind of the category context of what people are used to seeing also means that people appreciate it that bit more.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it is great. I'll put a link in the notes so people can go have a look at it because it's really entertaining. Do you know what? It kind of brings you back to some of the great beer advertising, maybe the 90s. Like, like some of the really great entertaining, like, called the Budweiser stuff. You know what I mean? That was just fun. And maybe, I just think maybe sometimes there's a lot of seriousness. And we've touched on this before. Like, why, like, you're in a strategy role. Like, you see it coming in. Like, why is there so much seriousness? And I know you care about the effectiveness of the work as well. So as you've already said it, it's not just about making great work for great work's sake. It's about it being really effective. So you understand the commerciality of the need for the work to be really successful and effective. And so I'm just curious, like, do you have a point of view on why?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. It's a really great question. I think that there are a few things which have probably contributed towards the lack of humor. Purpose-driven work. When I say purpose-driven work, I'm not talking about having a brand purpose. I'm talking about attaching yourself to like a social problem. It's just become the kind of trend of the last sort of like 6 or 7 years. And by its very nature, I mean, we've attached ourselves to a social problem that's funny, most of them.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of that. I think humor is a very subjective thing as well. And it's not always the easiest work to present to brands. It's just not. I think, that expression, one person's meat is another one's poison, is really true when it comes to humor. And I think those two are kind of quite big contributing factors for sure.
Yes. Yeah. I would agree with you there. It definitely leans itself to more, earnest piano music advertising.
Yeah. One of the best brands of the last kind of 5-6 years in the US is a beer brand. Is it called
Michelob?
Yeah, Michelob. Yeah. So they've done brilliant work. Really admire it. Grand Prix after Grand Prix after Grand Prix. But, the kind of problems they're attaching themselves to, or the things they're attaching themselves to are quite, again, serious and worthy. And that's just not what beer brands would have done, 15 years ago. So that is a really good example of a brand that has been incredibly effective, by the way. So it's probably not the best one, but I guess best one to pick on. But I guess that's kind of where a lot of brands in the category have gone, is kind of like looking to attach themselves to, I guess, issues that are a bit more serious or earnest.
Yeah. We need to have some fun. On the effectiveness side of things, how does that kind of manifest itself in the agency? Like, what is it's principles that I think you need to make sure people all understand. And sometimes I've certainly been on agency side where it's not understood or not. And this goes back, right? But like where people didn't care about it as much. It was like, well, it doesn't matter, like sell the idea. I think that's changed massively in most agencies now, but I'm just curious about how you kind of bring it into the agency and the work that you do.
Yeah, I think that there's sort of various different ways, really. One is that you'll quite often kind of stand up and do the talk around this is kind of the way that we do things based on this evidence from around the world. It's really boring, but we have written a book which is called How Special Does Brand Strategy, which kind of outlines this is the way we do things and why. I would say that, you know, even through the acts of pitching and stuff like that, like we might not necessarily have codified exactly how every last bit of it that we do, but everyone will go into that knowing we're setting up some form, not an execution. So it kind of feels like it's kind of become second nature to everyone. And we take effectiveness very serious. At Special will really kind of think quite far out, which not everyone does around, you know, what are we actually trying to measure before the campaign launches? Lots of people don't do that. So I guess it feels like we all speak the language now. And I don't necessarily need to worry about it not happening too much. Definitely more present amongst clients as well.
It's interesting. But it's interesting then when new stuff comes out, right? Because like the book, you know, do you keep updating that, or is it kind of like it's the Bible?
We've updated it. Yeah, we have, and we kind of tend to add in a lot of the kind of like newer things that have kind of, you know, will have emerged. But I guess the interesting thing about all of those principles, and this is kind of why it's kind of interesting because, you know, they must make a real living out of it every time they go and do a talk, is that actually so much of what we do in this industry is literally just about doing exactly the same thing that has not changed in its sort of thinking in many, many, many years. Yeah. Like coming up with a long-term idea is not something that was, you know, the long and short of its idea or Mark Ritson's idea, but they've done a very good job of proving why it works. But the reality is that for many, many years before that, people knew that. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that this industry constantly tries to reinvent itself and sort of say, oh, you know, they're the new thing that we need to do. Whereas the reality is that if you follow the 4 or 5 basic things that have kind of been in play for many years now, you tend to do okay for yourself.
Yeah. I think there's a bit of, I think they've done, like, you're right. People like Ritson and like James and other, like they do a great job of, and I don't want to, when I say simplified, I don't mean that in any sort of disrespectful way, but actually make it more accessible probably is a better way of,
they do.
Which is great. But I think you're right. A lot of the stuff is, people just need to read the history. I think sometimes more, and for me, I think Paul Feldwick's books are probably the best place to go to understand some of the history of what we say, say some of the things we say. So there'd be my recommendations. I think, are you going to write a book, Rory? I think you've got a book in you.
I'll never say never. I'd need to figure out what it'd be about.
There's definitely one in you. I don't know what it's about yet either, but I'll put the transcript into AI and see what it suggests.
I think that there's enough effectiveness experts out there, so I won't be joining the bandwagon on that. Who knows? One day I might, but I think for now I've got so much to keep me busy. It's not on the
We're going to come to time, but I mentioned, I jokingly said AI there, but can I ask how that's being used in the agency and how you were using it? I think it is the big topic, the big talking point. I think it's going to have a disruption this year. What that will be, I'm not clear on. I have some thoughts, but I'd love to get your perspective on it.
Yeah. Look, I might start with the negative because I'd love to end on a positive.
You're going to edit this so you end on the negative.
Look, it would be foolish to not think that AI is going to be, you know, present challenges for the industry. That's for sure. I think that the kind of the obvious ones are the production model. I think that agencies in general over the years have undercharged for their thinking, guardianship, ability to kind of like know what's good from what isn't. And we probably, you know, rely too much on production. It will be interesting to see what AI does from a production perspective, because more and more brands are starting to embrace it, not just for small things, but for bigger things too. So that's a challenge. And like, to be quite honest, I don't really know what you do about it. Other than just kind of, you know, charge for the things that you're good at. And that's not to say that, you know, there won't be still a huge role for great production craft and, you know, real shoots and all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is just that it will eat the lunch of agencies. So this wasn't actually me who said it, but I was talking about, do you know, in Conway? It's Irish fellow, is based in New York at VML. I was having a chat with him the other day, and he raised a really good point, which is a lot of the work that you do when you're kind of like a more sort of junior creative or junior strategist is not necessarily the most exciting stuff in the world. It's like the bread and butter. It's kind of the training wheels, for the want of a better word. And what ends up happening is when you end up becoming a senior creative, you've eaten your vegetables, you've done the training. So, you wouldn't throw someone into a professional football match having never played, under 16 football, for example. And the danger is that actually a lot of our talent loses out on the opportunity to, I guess, learn the ropes. So that's challenging because that could have a talent implication. So there's just a reality of there's some stuff that's going to happen. It's not going to be great. So I kind of tend to focus way more on what's exciting and what are the opportunities. And look, as an agency, we've embraced AI pretty quickly. And as a kind of input into strategy and strategic thinking, I just sort of say it's absolutely amazing. We've just got way faster. Our searches are much quicker. The way that we're using it is quite innovative and interesting. We actually did a thought piece last year on, how we were using AI. And I use it in every meeting. And to the point where my team have now started joking with me, which is they're not sure if what I'm saying is what I think or what I've got AI to think for me. But, AI has got its flaws and it's still a bit unreliable and it lies all the time. But, if you probe it and if you are really good at prompting it, it can be really fruitful. So I think that's great. Not always perfect, but it's having an impact across the board, I think, in a very positive way thus far.
Yeah, it's going to be, look, I think even, this time next year when we meet, if we were to have a conversation, I can't even predict where it is going to go. But I think all those things you say, and I won't end on a negative note, but I do agree the people coming into the industry, I think there's an onus on senior people in the industry to make sure junior people coming in don't lose the learnings of the things that will help them in their craft, right? It's that for me is a worry, but it goes back to maybe some of the other stuff we talked about, like, the education, the reading of the books, like it's actually available. And so maybe there's a bit of just people need to, do that and not ask AI to give you the book summary.
No, it's very much so. And look, I mean, there's still major questions around, the ethics of AI around IP and stuff like that. And I think that's not going to be solved overnight. So look, I'm sure we would have moved on in 12 months time, but I can't see, it just feels like we're on a bit of a journey as to what the impact of it is. And I think it's going to be a bit down the road before we've got a true understanding. But what I do know is that there's lots of amazing things that it's helping me do every day. And we have some fun with it too.
Well, I'm the same. I use it every day. And sometimes it sends me off in the wrong direction. I'm like, no, who fights with it with AI? But it's all good.
Even like simple things like, Reddit has got this kind of thing. I don't know what you describe, but it's called shower thoughts. It's just random thoughts people have in the shower. So we'll kind of we'll take a brand. It's like, give me some shower thoughts around, this fast food brand. And it comes up with just some interesting things that kind of provide stimulus. So there's all sorts of fun stuff you can do with it. Have an argument with it. Ask why your idea is good. Ask why you're bad. Like that's like, we're kind of using it at every level. It's nearly kind of like become an extension of the questions you just asked yourself already. And I think for those who kind of embrace it early and make it second nature, they'll end up finding, I guess, far more richness than problems.
Yeah, that I was using it recently for something exactly like that. I was like, okay, I like this and I like this, and I was thinking about this, and can we work together making this better? It's like, Connor, it's a computer, but it worked. And you use it like, it was like, it's like I was talking to somebody I was working with. Do you know what I mean? And you're kind of having that conversation. And I'm fully aware of how, lonely that sounds.
Yeah. But it's true. I mean, and I think particularly in strategy, you don't work in you don't work in a team in the same way that creatives get to. So it's definitely helpful to have something advance.
Listen, Rory, thanks a million. I really appreciate taking the time. I was really looking forward to doing this with you. And yeah, I might see you this side of the world at some point.
Hopefully, yeah. Well, hopefully, I really appreciate you having me on, and yeah, hope some of my thinking has a positive impact somewhere.
It is. It's brilliant. Listen, you're very good. Thanks a million.
Thanks, million.
Well, what an amazing episode with Rory. And of course, I forgot to mention at the start, Rory's an Irish guy, an Irishman living in New Zealand. I forgot to introduce that to you. You're probably all expecting a Kiwi accent there when you heard Rory. So apologies for that, but amazing insights from the phenomenal work that Rory has done with Special Group and throughout his career. And, you know, strategy is one of those things in an agency that is so important, because when you get great strategy and strategic thinking in an agency, it can make such a huge difference. And it really is important. There's obviously lots of discussions, and I've been part of them, talking about how the agency model can and probably will change over this year and into the next couple of years. And where we start seeing, you know, the role of strategy and the role of technology and how that's going to evolve. So really interesting to hear Rory's perspective on all of that as well. And look, the thing is, Special Group just continue to bring out special work. I mean, it's such a great name for them. Fair play to Cade for coming up with that name, because the work is special, the work is good, and they're commercially minded as well. They get the importance of the commercial work. So really, really great to hear Rory's story, hear what they're looking at, the things they're working on, and the opportunities that he sees for this industry into 2025 and beyond. And hopefully get to bump into Rory at Cannes this year. And of course, if you'd like to get involved with us in our Cannes sessions this year, drop me a note. I'm on LinkedIn and you'll be able to find us there, and I will send you through the sponsorship kit for Cannes or other sponsorship opportunities that we have. But that's what I call marketing. This is just a great way to help the show grow. It reduces the costs that I have personally. I don't make money out of this. It is a passion project of mine, so it just helps keep us going and keep us on the air. That is it for this episode. If you did enjoy this episode, share it with one person. We'd really appreciate that. And if you like it and rate or review it, it really does help. And if you subscribe, you will get notified when the next episode lands. You don't have to go looking for it. It will come find you. Listen, thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. From me, your host, Conor Byrne. Take care.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.